What's up, bro? Not much, just coming up to that point where I had to fight that big. You have to fight that big uh wraith dude. Yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to prepare for it. Oh no. Okay. Sorry. There we go, baby. Sorry, you're just it's so beautiful. It's hard not to. Oh, right. Oh, I've yet to do this, so let's do this. The the arena, the 2-man arena. Holy trial.
Nothing comes easy in this world.
All the server just randomly dropped not long ago. It's kind of funny. Wow, it's almost understandable though. They're trying to before, if you remember, there was 3 servers, and now they're loading everyone into one. Mm-hmm.
Greetings.
I don't have much to say.
Got everything you need?
Holy trial reward box. You can exit the I completed the first arena. You can exit through the Vanquisher of Maiden of Light. Nice.
What is it?
That was pretty simple.
Time seeing the game's launch looks so sad.
Alright, let's see what I got from that box.
Hi.
Greetings.
Got everything you need?
Oh, there we go. What do you mean equipment upgrade? Why can't I use a weapon upgrade? Stone. Why do I need an equipment upgrade, Stone?
The gods work in mysterious ways, huh?
They smoke too much meth, don't they? Swear to God.
What is it?
Like, not even just meth, but like meth and meth accessories. It's bad. Who needs cardio? I'm riding a goat. Right? Fucking bullshit.
I'm going to leave this place someday.
The, the chat's pretty funny actually. This one guy's like, this one guy's like, because they're talking about cardio, right? It's like, who needs cardio when you got a goat? And then he's like, I don't know what's up with this, but he goes, this nigga's got no cardio. He goes, he can run 10 feet. You gotta run 10 feet. You gotta take a break. Like, yeah. I've somewhat gotten used to it. By the time you get to level 5, you can kind of run around, or you can use your mount. But it is a little bit of a complaint of mine. The one thing about this game is like They were supposed. They fixed it, but they didn't fix it enough. Like originally it was. They were supposed to increase the out of combat sprint speed, or sprint time, and they did, but not by much.
Greetings.
You when you logged in, did it tell you that because you linked your Xbox with your Bandai Namco account, you now have what's it called? When the game comes out, you will be receiving a free, like a golden Hyenderon or something like that, Hyendeon or whatever. No. Yeah. Okay. I was just wondering if, because I wasn't sure if you actually linked the battle, your Xbox account to a thing, right? Okay, cool. I gotta watch that. I gotta watch some of these videos. This guy kills me.
Hey man, these shorts make my ass look fat. Oh my god, man. This is you know? I mean, yes. Yeah, it's fat, man. You got a fat ass on you. I wasn't gonna bring it up until you said anything, but you think like we could maybe kiss? Kiss? I don't think we can hang out anymore.
I wasn't gonna say anything before, but like, yeah, but like, you thinking we can maybe kiss? Like, I don't think we can hang out anymore. Are you streaming right now?
Did you want to tell me something?
going to leave this place someday.
I don't like this mission. How come I... Okay, this is ridiculous. I can't even get to the Geist Warden. I'm...
A little hard work never hurt anyone.
Oh, you're at the Wolf King? I'm trying to find out from people how to freaking get an equipment advancement stone, because I can't turn my thing into green because I don't have an equipment advancement stone, but I have weapons and armor advancement, so I don't have an equipment one, but my axe needs an equipment. Yeah, I don't know. Oh yeah, the Crusader's pretty cool. Oh. So if I do this mission again, it's supposedly gonna give me an equipment? Okay. I'll totally roll with that. So this time, it won't allow me to upgrade my armor. But I don't have the PC to upgrade the armor like we did last time, so... The Dice Wars is going to be interesting if that's the case. Okay, I got an equipment one. Go upgrade my axe.
it is you need, you can find it here. I guarantee you'll walk away pleased with your purchase.
Where is she, Mom? Well, of course you're gonna be tired.
I'm away,
Having
my
an
lords.
what ended up being like what, an hour and a half? Even. Oh yeah. Now, was it Opie that you said it was Opie that wouldn't let you sleep, or Chibs that wouldn't let you sleep? Oh. Yeah. Mhm. Oh goodness. Making coffee at 11 o'clock at night. Be like, babe, I need it so that I can, like, stay up and stream. Oh, she's not that bad. I thought her family was more like that. Yeah. Oh. So they really moved that pit, eh? That fire pit for the Grasslands giant. Remember the giant that kept respawning? They a decent, well, it's like the other side of the path, like, so it's not in the pit where you fight the guy, but in a different, yeah. Oh. Slade. Oh, that's some serious defense. That should help. Oh, that should help a lot too. I'm gonna put that one on just because it gets extra. Oh, that's decent there.
Greetings.
With the hobble. He's a Boston man. Hobble. Hobble. Oh, where are you? Let's pass tier 3. Kill a wandering mountain giant, equip a piece of equipment with new appearance, complete the dungeon 3 times, okay, obtain a new mount, okay, uh, sure, sure, sounds good, man. Use a telepost to travel, okay. Oh, that should be helpful. Okay, so I'm doing a lot more damage, but I'm still getting my ass kicked. I feel like they made this Geese Warden harder. Took away his heal, but it made him harder. Or maybe it's just the freaking Berserker. Berserker sucks. I don't know. They do a lot of damage, it's just... Come over here, hurry. I don't want to hurry. I'm scared. I'm scared of that thing. I totally kicked his ass so much easier last time. Why is he so hard now? I don't get it. Not a big fan of the Archer, or? Oh, come on. You can try it. Come on. Like... I've only gotten the Geese Warden in this... Like, each... Okay, come on. This is ridiculous. This guy is so hard. Is he? Oh, come on, what is this? I've used like all of my potions and everything just to get to... just to be able to somehow maintain this. Yeah. Oh my god. You know what? You said you're making a new character, right? I'm gonna come making a new character with you two. This berserker's starting to annoy me. I don't know. They've got cool fighting styles, but they're like too slow, and they like their damage output doesn't equal what I would feel it should do. You know what I mean? I'm gonna make a male infant crusader. Oh well, male. They're all males, but yeah, an infant crusader. You know what? Just for shits and giggles, I'm actually gonna make him really tiny. All for shits and giggles. Oh yeah? What did you say? Okay, sounds good. Oh, I forgot he's not. Yeah, I gotta go through my list. Give me a second. I got it. Alright, cool.
Hey guys.
What's up, buddy?
Nothing much. I was watching you on Twitch there, and you can't. I can hear Zed, but I can't hear you. Yeah, I'm just like watching your silent stream. No, it's okay. I was just letting you know. Like I can hear Zed, and obviously you're talking back to him. And
Okay.
like, for some reason.
No, it's it looks like it's working now. I just changed the properties and went back to it.
Okay, I'm gonna switch my inputs to.
So
Oh, okay.
I don't know why that was.
Yeah, just how are you guys liking that?
I'm liking it pretty good. I had to switch classes.
They made a lot of really good changes.
Cool.
Yeah.
My browser encountered an error while decoding the video after
Stand
reloading.
behind
Yeah,
me.
I can.
Hurry!
I can hear you now.
Yay!
Anything like this.
Do you wish to continue?
Who'd like to test my performance? Oh no.
Be silent and
Of course, I know
It's
how to
funny to
speak.
hear you from the
Curious about
freaking
the
Xbox
origin of
party,
life.
and then 3 or 4 seconds later on the browser.
Now this is
Check it, check it, check it.
protect those I have away.
Yeah. What did they change? Like, what's the good stuff?
forest
that
is
they,
on our
put in
way.
here, or you just
Are you
make? Well, I can
curious
see you
about
making
the
new
forest
characters.
is on our side?
Are you curious about the forest is on our side?
Well, they
Are
they
you
fixed the
curious
combat.
about the I have
They
away?
fixed
Are you curious about the
The forest is on our
they fixed
side.
like the crafting systems.
curious
So the
about
crafting
the forest is on
better
our side?
now. Things are a little like it's a little easier to dodge now. Less buggy. It's still buggy, but it's less buggy right now, so that's good.
It looks pretty cool.
What are you making?
I hear myself talk, then I echo through Zed's mic, then I echo through Twitch.
That's too funny. So you're like hearing yourself 3 times.
Hey, you guys.
Hey, you, guys.
Joe likes the fact that you can make your character sweaty. now.
You can make them like look like they got baby oil on. It's freaking crazy.
Where the light ends,
It's better than the underwear on.
a black blade shall split the sky.
Insane in my brain.
Did you get to import your character?
Nah, they wiped everything.
No.
Which, I don't know. I mean, I'm okay with. It's just that this is what happens with betas. But with Terra, I played a Mystic in the beta, and then the whole time playing the game when it was live, I never played a Mystic again. I tried all the other classes because I didn't want to play the same class. And I didn't have. I had fun with the priest. I took the priest all the way up to max level, and then I didn't get all my gear all maxed. But I actually had the most fun playing with the Mystic. And I didn't play that while the game was live.
Is that just like a mage?
Kind of. Yeah, it's like a healer hybrid kind of thing. It has like things it can conjure. Like something to act as kind of like a tank, something to act like as a damage dealing. I forget what they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, DPS.
Yeah, but the actual things, the actual
Oh yeah, okay.
do you remember what they're called, Zed?
Not really. No.
Shit, they were like
The
Ah, man, it's bothering me.
Oh. The
Yeah,
Mystic,
the
is that what
things
you're talking about?
they would summon. No,
what?
like the little like NPC characters.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, he would summon like things to follow and like help him with stuff. So like you could like basically run it
Did
by
you say-
yourself.
yeah.
You can. The first thing you learn to summon is a like a thing that follows you and like acts as a tank, takes damage for you. And then so that can like take all the aggro, and then you can do your thing. You mean from afar.
Oh god, Zero, I wish you could see my character right now.
Oh, what are you doing?
I'm making a Crusader, but it's called an Ippen. Which are like little like, I don't even know what they are. Like dogs, I'd say, maybe? They're like little like, they're kind of like little like, they look like like animal, like humanoid dogs, almost.
Yeah, they're like the size of like gnomes from like World of Warcraft or something. They're like little tiny things.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're like animals.
Exactly.
They're adorable, basically.
Summoned by an evil force. An enemy you will encounter
Wait, is that
on
your
the road
character
ahead.
itself, though, is it? Or like your character's companions of some sort?
Oh, it's my character himself.
Just a little fella.
He's just a little fella.
Damn, this mage does crazy damage. Oh, that
Yeah,
hurt.
the mage is pretty OP when it comes to damage.
Oh, like teleport? That's what that is? Oh, this takes so long to power up. I don't know if I'm actually doing damage or not. Boom! Take that, mother bitch! 1,000 damage.
You, who are protected by the White Lantern, must
I
defeat
am
them.
Taken out.
Whoa.
Blessing be with you always.
Why is his arms yellow? It's kind of annoying. What is with his arms being yellow? It's annoying.
Powering up my Doctor Strange circle.
It does look like Doctor Strange.
I've yet to actually land one of these. I don't know what it does. Takes forever to power up.
Yeah, it takes a wicked long cast, yeah. Like a WoW fucking pyro maybe. What you would call it, the big ass fireball.
So I have to hold B? No, that's on cooldown. Everything's on cooldown. I can't even like refill my mana. I just have to do that. Maybe that refills my mana. I'm confused.
You get one of your abilities. I think it would be like your left trigger or whatever. It refills your mana.
Okay, so that's is refilling my mana. Okay. Because with the archer, it's B refills your arrows. So I thought that's what I had to do for that. Okay.
No. B is a boost. It gives you like a critical hit boost.
Okay, I see. Come and get some, bitch.
Is it like a frost build or something, Joe, or is that just?
That's just one of the attacks. That's just
He's
This is like a dream world where they give you all of your abilities, and then you can see if it's cool to play. And then like when I wake up, I have like one of those 4 abilities.
Oh, okay, that's kind of cool. All right. It's like just different trees in your class.
Kind of. It's not really trees. It's you get like blessings. I don't know. It's
Hard. You just gotta play it.
Oh, that hurt. That hurt.
Okay, I gotta go back. This is annoying.
Take that lightning, bitch. What? That didn't even hit me. That definitely did not hit me. Oh, that won't go far enough. Boom. 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 I ain't afraid of your hot ass breath. Come and get it.
Are you guys trying shit out before you join together?
Yeah, there's a certain a little bit you have to play by yourself. And like he was playing a character that he made earlier while I was in the beginning, and I wasn't really enjoying the arch. I mean, I was also like really tired and like falling asleep earlier. So,
yeah,
maybe that was the arch, or maybe that wasn't. Maybe it was just because I'm tired from work. But I just decided I need a whole change of scenery. I went to get a soda. I put a hat on. I changed my character. So I'm making a new character. So he's making a new character as well.
there you go.
So as soon as we'll be able to link up, we will.
Partially because the Berserker is annoying. Was annoying too.
Yeah, they're going to start selling alcohol at the Dollar Tree.
At the Dollar Tree? What? That's crazy. Oh, I died. What? I have 10 health potions. If I would have realized, I would have just taken a health potion. Damn it, damn it, damn it.
Oh, dude. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Dollar Tree owns Family Dollar, and it says they're adding it to Family Dollar stores. Maybe I don't know. This is a confusing article.
I mean, that makes more sense because Dollar Tree, everything's $1. I'm like, what kind of alcohol could you buy for $1?
Right. Yeah, I assume singles or something. It says that they're going to brand about 200 Family Dollar stores to Dollar Tree and brand them to Dollar Tree. Oh, and it says, and conduct a test in which it offers more items for more than its customary $1 per item.
They did what?
They're going to test out selling more shit for more than $1.
Oh, well, that ruins the Dollar Tree then.
Right. I don't think it's like going to be like, maybe they're trying to be more like, you know, top to low or something. It's just 2 cases of 4 Loco and various varieties.
4 Loco's some good shit, man. Have you?
I've never even tried it.
Yeah, it's not as good now that they got rid of all the like poison in it, but.
Right.
But if you drink a little, if you get a 4 Loco, you take a little bit of it. I don't know, drink like 2 ounces out of it, then you pour one of those 5-hour energy shots in it. It's just as bad for you.
Oh shit.
What? He was like facing the other way. I'm like missing him. Come on, man. There we go.
Oh,
There we go. Oh.
You know how well mentions them all these clickbait articles at the bottom. I just came across one in that same Dollar Tree article. It says, Honey Boo Boo is so skinny now and looks like a goddess.
But yeah, but like now she's still only 8. So like, why would they post that?
I thought she's like 14.
I have no idea.
She's got to be quite a bit. I don't know. Time flies.
I thought she was like 4 in the show.
I have no idea. Oh yeah, you're right. She was a really young. Yeah, that. I clicked on the article, nothing came up.
It's gonna take you to like some creepy porn site.
Yeah, it's fucking.
Just pictures of a sugar bear rubbing his nipples.
Oh, good. Goodness gracious.
Oh shit.
Yeah, her mom like lost a bunch of weight, like cocaine, meth, or something, and I think she like divorced Sugar Bear. Just like a poor guy, like
Sugar Bear.
Yeah, like poor guy, like that sucks. Like I mean, he's not like a great looking dude, but like he's not terrible, and like she was terrible.
God damn! I mean, look who he's
She was like gross on gross. Yeah, like, and I mean, like, I don't really know how great of a personality she has. If like, she's like, first of all, putting your child in pageants is a little bit weird, but then to like,
yeah, that's the stuff.
Have a TV show all about your weird, super hick, super hillbilly family, and like making money off like your kid. It's just it's weird. Did you ever watch the show?
It is weird. I've seen like
Have you ever seen like when they're doing like
I've
the
never
confessionals and they have to stop because the train's going by? Because like you go out back of their house and it's like 25 yards and there's like a railroad track that runs through it.
That's hilarious, dude. Oh my gosh. Freight train.
Yeah, and it's like super slow because it is a freight train, so it's
shit.
like
Oh my gosh.
it's
That's
really good
hilarious,
stuff.
dude. What are the confessionals like? About
Yeah,
the
it's just
family life or
it's just like what's going on in the show, and then they're like they get a chance to talk to one of them alone or whatever, or they probably schedule it and they're like, yeah, so like what's going on, and they just kind of talk about whatever. One of the chicks picked.
Did you?
Yeah. I'm talking. I just talked to Marco. And now there's a bunch of mages. There's like 4 mages all standing there. We're all wearing the same weird ass robe. But one of their daughters either picked her nose during one of the things, or picked her nose and ate it. I forget now. It was something super gross. Let's see. Honey, Boo Boo, sister. Pickup lines? What? I'm very curious to that.
Yeah. It probably gets put on watch list of some sort.
This is gonna be too funny. I can't believe I'm playing it, and I never thought I'd actually play it when I first started playing this game. Or when I first saw this game, but whatever. I'm gonna roll with it. They're so little cute and adorable.
Yeah, I like the little. Like I was the little girl in Terror, the little anime waifu thing.
Yeah. his suit, his little suit of armor is just killing me right now.
Oh yeah, he's like wears bones or something, doesn't he? Or at least a picture he's wearing bones.
Hey, no, he's like in a full arm, like knight suit, so he's got like armor and like all that, like a full-on metal helmet and everything. And he looks like he stole like kid's costume and some little kid's costume. It's so adorable.
That's
Let me know
funny.
when you get to Marco, and we'll so I can see you. Now, the first time I went through this with the Archer, I was doing like little voices for everybody I was talking to. I was reading all the text and voices. That was a lot of work, and I'm not doing that again. Sorry about your luck.
Dude, I just read this little mini article. It said some dude in Winnipeg, a city snow plow or snow removal truck or something like damaged his curb out front of his house, and like he kept calling about it to get it repaired and stuff, and finally they put it on the list to get repaired, and like I guess they have like a computerized system where you can see your claims, and it says investigated and added to repair list, due date 6/26/2037.
I mean, like, it's fucked up. If they broke his shit, they should fix his shit.
Yeah. I live on kind of a tight street, and this dude drove his semi for a delivery at this store that's behind my house, and like he couldn't get out of it. He was like an inexperienced driver, and he couldn't back up out of the street. And he smashed this lady's wall like
Oh shit!
across the intersecting street to mine, and like, you know, they said they're gonna repair it, but that was like, I don't know, 3 months ago, and they haven't repaired it yet.
I mean, that's yeah.
That would suck. Like, they didn't even tell her, but we told, like, she asked me and somebody else, and I get, you know, I saw it and I told her what happened, and I think somebody else told her that she called the trucking company.
Like, that's super fucked up. Like shit happens. Accidents happen. You know what I mean? But like,
Sure.
try to like hide it. Like, that's just. It's no longer, oh, it's just an accident, it's whatever. It's like, you clearly are a shady ass motherfucker.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like, it was loud as shit. It was loud as hell.
I mean, I've never left the scene of an accident. I mean, if no one was looking, never did that.
Yeah, I mean,
I know you're thinking right now, like, is he telling the truth or is he lying? I don't really know.
I've never done anything like you know, the only thing at one time I was at lunch and I opened my door and it touched the door next to me, okay? I didn't like slam my door open and slam it into a door. I was opening it carefully and it touched it, and I looked and I couldn't tell if there was any damage from it. I mean, like, it was incredibly minor, you know, and I started to, like, I was on my lunch break from work and I just let it go, but I didn't think
that's
that, you know, if anything, it might have put something where it would polish out, you know. It wasn't a dent.
yeah,
There was no
that's
dent, there was no
I mean,
paint missing.
that I've done.
You
That
know.
I've like opened my car door and hit the car next to me, like, oh shit. Sometimes I don't even get out and look. I'll just
I mean,
because you know, if you hit it hard enough, then you know that there's damage. But if it's just like, oh, there might be a scrape there, I just like go to another spot.
Yeah, it's like such a, I mean, I don't think I would, if somebody did that to mine, I might be a little pissed if it was something I could notice, but I don't think I would, like, call their insurance about it, you know. I would, even if they told me, you know, I'd probably just be like, well,
Yeah.
fuck it. And put some
Yeah,
wax
like
on it or
I mean, I'm
something.
very easygoing. I mean, I love my cars, but I'm very easygoing about them. Like, shit happens. You know what I mean,
Sure,
like,
yeah. When it's like so minor, you can't even tell if something
Yeah.
really happened. I mean, you know, it's like
I've been in the car at like a mall, and somebody's opened the door into my car, like, and that's really awkward, cause like they're like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, like, and it's awkward because like you never know how the other person's gonna react, and like I don't even get out of the car. I like it doesn't sound like it dented the car. Even if it, or maybe it scratched it, it's like whatever. I mean, I'm not gonna. My car's got other scratches. I'm not gonna take it to the body shop and get it painted for this scratch. So I'm not gonna get out and break their balls about it. It's I mean, just like, all right, yeah, no problem, you're good. Like,
yeah. Just an accident, little accident. Man, my nephew got rear-ended by this lady, and it hit him hard enough to like warp his frame.
Oh shit!
But like, you couldn't even tell. You could hardly tell that it had hit him just because of the resiliency of the plastic bumper.
Oh yeah.
Just popped out, you know. And like her car, like her bumper was kind of like butterflied a little bit. But like her insurance company was trying to say, oh look, there's no visible damage, but you know he's got the
see.
And shit, so.
So are you near? Are you near?
I'm right by Marco. So like the very beginning, we got to give the soup to the farmhand.
What's your character?
Philly, Philly.
Why can't I see you?
I'm standing on the fence in front of Marco. Wait, trying to stand on the fence in front of Marco.
Maybe you just haven't showed up.
I've been here
yet.
for a little bit. I'm jumping on the fence in front of Marco.
Oh, maybe you're in a different channel.
How do I?
Are you in channel 1? Press select or whatever that button is. You know what I mean by that. And then when you see it'll say channel. Hit Y and it'll tell you what channel you're in. If you're in channel 1, then I'll switch to channel 1. Or if you're in channel 3,
I'm in channel 1.
Channel 3.
It looks like.
Are you watching, Zero?
Yeah, for now. I'm about to do a little bit of housework here, but I just figured I'd shoot the shit a few minutes.
Yeah, man, we love the shit being shot.
All right. You should be here. You should see me soon.
Are you that tiny purple-haired one? Oh,
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a little.
No, I'm not in armor yet. I'm not in armor yet. That was in the dream.
Okay, so I assume it's gonna look something like that guy
Philly.
there, Gato.
I can't really see
if you see
high
in
enough
front of me.
resolution to see the one you're referring to.
Oh, there he is, Zeddy. I was referring to this guy right here in front of me, this Gato guy that my crosshairs are on.
Oh yeah,
Because I saw he has a sword and a shield.
That is adorable.
But here's Zeddy, this.
Yeah, he's Crusader. Yeah, you see Zeddy there.
He's like a little
The one
cat
that's
person.
jumping.
I know they're more like dogs, but they have like the face of a cat. I don't know. All right, let's go, little friend. I'll protect you from
That's funny.
the evils of this world. Oh, I gotta
Right?
check the mail. Get it? Checking the mail. Well, here's a gift for you for Archer.
I won a game of Apex.
Oh,
Heroes
did
on
you?
here. It's pretty fun. Yeah, I had a damage record. I was like 1,536 or
Damn.
something. I mean, for my
Yeah,
a personal
no,
damage record.
I'm not getting any records that aren't personal records. I'm not breaking anything.
No. I looked at some jobs today. Like
How-
listings? Oh, go ahead. Zip.
How in the world can I get any of this soup? I can't even reach the top of the pot. Like.
Oh, actually, let's join a party. How do I? Wait. It said to interact.
Easiest is
There we go.
if I see you like that. There you go.
There we go. We're in a party. Philly and Zeddy just partying up the road. Alright, so where do we go? I gotta collect the healing herbs for the griffin. So let me know when you're up to that.
I'll be there. Yeah, I'll be there soon. I'll put these boots on.
Oh, did I put my boots on? I did.
Alright, then I gotta talk to this guy who wants fun.
Alright, he's gonna give you a whole bunch of gold for bringing him soup for 12 steps.
Hey, man, it's
Mm-hmm.
fine with me.
So, I gave my character dark green hair because he's from Philly, so he bleeds green. Go Eagles! Giants.
Giants. Eagles, Giants.
I don't know sports.
Yeah, I'm not a sports guy either. I'll
Go
occasionally
New York,
watch
yeah.
one or two things, but some of my friends, you know, lose their shit over sports.
Yeah, see, I don't get it either. And you know, I let them lose their shit, but everybody's got something fucking smart to say to me about gaming. Like, somebody from Kim's extended family made a comment, and I wasn't even really upset about it. It's just like she was like one of 1,000 people that have said something to me. We're at like a family party thing, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I saw you streaming. Oh, you play a lot of games or something." And I was like, "Yeah, like Kim knows that like ideally like this is what I would do for a living, like if I could make it work." You know what I mean? So like Kim understands, but like nobody else understands. So I didn't say anything, and I've had like plenty of people make comments like that. I had someone that I used to hang out with make a comment like, "Joe, if I get one more update about you and some video game shit,
Streaming, yeah.
it's like I'm gonna lose my mind." And then my other buddy was like, "Yeah, we listen to all your bullshit about your shit. You're gonna deal with my man's shit," something like that.
I remember that you were on stream. It was shortly after you started streaming, and the guy's like, your friend.
Yeah, my buddy's like, "We listen to all your bullshit. Like you're gonna deal with my man's shit." And then, so in the beginning of football season, my neighbor, who like has like a bouncy house across the street, does all these crazy things. He had like a fucking probably a 10-foot tall blow up Cowboys helmet. So I posted on. I wanted to take a picture of it, but I'm like, I shouldn't take a picture of like this dude's house, so I didn't. But I posted on like Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. Maybe it was just Facebook, but I posted it was like, judging by my neighbor's giant inflatable football helmet on his lawn, I guess football season started, and everybody, or I'm like, and I don't tell anybody how ridiculous they sound when they're screaming at the TV, and a team and a coach that can't hear them and wouldn't listen to them even if they could hear them. But everybody gets on my case about gaming. Even this is what I do to relax, and then whatever, some shit like that. And it was kind of directed to everybody that's ever said anything to me. But I tagged the one dude who was talking shit like, if I get one more notification about you gaming, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Yeah, and they game too. They play fantasy football
Right,
and shit all
which
the
is
fucking
super
time.
weird. It's like video games is a
it's like
child's
just another
thing,
game.
but like you're literally like using your imagination to be a coach of a football team. Like it's more childish than anything I've
Right.
done in the last 25 years. Like you're playing make believe.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, It's just like I mean, it's like a more boring version
Yes,
of gaming.
it's like
I mean, it's
like the
game, but
poor
it's-
person's version
Oh,
of
that's
gaming.
more than- It's just a bunch
Yeah.
of stats. Yeah, it's like you're just. Isn't the way it works? I think like you choose actual players, and whatever their stats are during that season, they add
Yeah.
up to make your team.
Yeah,
or whatever.
and but there's
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you
I
have
don't know if it's-
competitions or whatnot.
It's like playing stats
Yeah.
against each other.
there's
I've done it
some
before.
some things are worth points. Sometimes I don't know if it's always like this, but like if they get a touchdown or an interception or whatever, they get there's certain points.
Oh, right, okay.
And every X amount of yards rushed is this, and now whatever. I guess it doesn't always have to be like that, but I've never done it, but I've seen leagues like that. And it was too confusing. I was just like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'll just sit out. Like,
Yeah. If I knew enough about sports to fucking, well, I mean, I probably wouldn't do it anyway.
the only thing that interests me about it is like the gambling
understand
side of
it,
it. When everybody's like, oh, let's put like $10 in.
Yeah, that would be cool.
But then I'm
man,
basically
some
throwing
money.
it away because I have no idea. I probably have better chances of hitting a lottery and lying to everybody and telling them I hit for $250,000.
Oh, that's so fucked up.
Yeah, it's
That's crazy.
fucking insane. It blows my mind.
What do you get out of it?
I really think it's he gets people to talk to him, which like is really sad.
Oh yeah,
It's-
that's.
You know, tell your neighbors sports
Yeah.
is bread and circuses. What? Dude, I love that comment. I don't know what that means though. Tell your neighbors sports is bread and circuses.
Oh, it's like the Romans. There's I don't know the whole story, but there's something about
Bread and circuses.
the Romans just needed bread and it's kind of like it's your opiate for the masses, so to speak. You know,
Okay.
you just give the populace bread and circuses, and they'll be happy. So to
Well, good thing we got a smart ass mofo in the party, because I was lost. Frankenpope. I love that name
Smart
too.
ass.
Frankenpope. Good stuff.
That's pretty funny. Oh, you got 3 viewers.
Oh, look at us. Look at us being
Pumping up
halfway
those
famous.
numbers.
Oh, there's a chest to loot over here. How do we get through it?
Those are rookie numbers in this game. You gotta pump those numbers up.
Oh, the Wolf King. It's the Wolf King. Wolf King.
Remember doing
Yeah.
that before?
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to find this. Oh, you're at the chest. There's the chest. I was just next to that. I didn't see it. I am not liking this hat. This hat is really weird.
Oh, the
Yeah,
hat.
it's like a... I don't know. It's like a fedora if I glued the front of it to my forehead. That's really dumb looking. Are you around? Yeah. You see this thing? Like, how
Yeah.
dumb is that hat? You are adorable, though. Like, and it's so absurd that the little dog people are, like, supposed to be the tanks. Like, yeah.
Oh, really?
Like,
That's
you have a sword and a shield, like, like, who would send you out on the front lines?
Maybe they're so tiny that, like, when the dudes come attack them, it's like super hard to hit them.
Oh, you want to get a kick out of something good, Joe? You know the Cyclops fight in the beginning? I literally ran between the two
Really?
legs.
I'm kind of jealous. I wish I was an Eppin.
It was kind of funny, or at least it looked like it. When I rolled, it looked like I ran between his legs.
And if the taller guy wants a BJ, neither one of you have to.
Oh,
crouch.
yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
Oh shit.
So am I the taller guy in that situation?
This was my favorite class in the first. In the first area, this was my favorite class. So I think this is. What
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
didn't
stick
play it,
with
but I've like
when the
watching
game
you and watching
launches.
other people play them. Like they have good moves. Show us your moves, Eddie. Like the movement looks like it's fun. Jumping around and well,
Do you move? Do you move like equally as fast, regardless of race?
yeah, I think so.
Look at this. By the way, look at me running off. Okay, like look, stand there for a second, and I'm gonna run towards you. Just watch my
Okay.
character, okay? So, I gotta get him to take out his sword. He just runs with the little sword, just throwing around the sky.
That looks like Chucky coming at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
I mean, I'd be terrified. Oh, Wolf
Oh,
King.
here's the Wolf King.
Yeah, that looks pretty
I didn't have my mana build up. Hit him with the ice blast. Boom. Building up my mana. Catch this. Ow. Oh, something's hurting me. Oh. Time for one of them healing potions. Building up my mana. Do my Doctor Strange circles.
Is this like a
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Boom, Wolf King, Dunzo. Everybody get your loot.
Go with Wolf King.
Now I got this sweet gloves to put on. Bam. Can I hide my helmet?
Yep.
I guess it's probably in.
It's in options, settings, gameplay, hide helmet.
There we go. That's much better.
Don't forget to open up your Wolf King reward box.
I gotta.
Well, that's a neat option. You don't have to see all your gear.
You might get
like that.
a better helmet.
Consumables. Wolf King reward box.
Did they say they will let you keep your character in this beta to the full game?
No.
Then,
Oh, that's kind of lame,
Wipe
but
this.
view item. Oh yeah, I got an aesthetics hat.
What?
An aesthetics hat.
Oh, so you got a better hat.
Yeah. So let me go turn this on.
it's like a dude that doesn't. That's like real fucking basic. Like doesn't eat shit. I mean, doesn't eat anything. He doesn't. He's like a minimalist dude.
An aesthetic.
Oh, it's just like a little it's like a little headband.
I'm like Naruto.
That's actually.
Yeah, it's
half
much better than
decent.
my dumbass fedora.
Fadama.
Fadama.
It's a fedama. Chibs, you're not going out. You're staying here. You have to pee your pants.
One. I'm gonna do a few things around the house here. I'll stick on your stream. I'm gonna cut off the Xbox, but I might hop back in a few
Alright.
minutes or something. Or in a little
Sounds good. Adios.
while. Peace. See you guys.
Are you doing something? Do you have a quest I don't have?
Bandit.
Okay,
ambush?
I just did that, I guess. I don't know, you just were further back, so I thought maybe you were doing a quest that I didn't pick up or something.
No, I just picked up
okay.
a chest.
Actually, I really gotta go to the bathroom. I will be right back in like 30 seconds. BRBs. Watch out. Watch out. No, get in. Get in, get in, get in. Get in. Get in. Okay. Go. Go, wait, come here. Come on, bud, look at me. Come here. Yeah, bud, it's me and you. Just me and you. You're gonna drive me freaking nuts. I know you are. Alright. I'm back with Obadiah pain in the balls quirk.
Obadiah pain in the balls.
Yep. His full name is Obadiah.
Pause the Kong again. Make sure he doesn't, like, maybe put the towels down again.
Okay. Obadiah. What is it? I don't know. It was some crazy long name Kim gave him. It was like Obadiah. Fuck, I can't think. But it was like Game of Thrones, Daenerys' name. How it was like Daenerys Stormborn.
Targaryen.
First of her name.
Oh yeah.
Mother of dragons, breaker of chains, freer of slaves, sucker of cocks. Stuff like that. So.
Fuck you though. You killed me with that.
Yeah. So it's something like that. It was like Obadiah. It was Obadiah.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Dogo. No, Carl Dogo. Cal Doggo, because he's a dog. Cal Doggo. First of his name, freer of, or breaker of kennels. And then like we had him for a day or two, and it was chewer of everything or something. It was some crazy shit. It was like 15 names long. And now we have to talk to him so much, like I don't say anything more than no. Or give. Or that's not a toy.
Yeah, that's not a toy. Well, my most common thing to my dog right now is, where did you get that?
Why do you have poop in your teeth? Where did you get that? That's the worst, when Opie picks up poop from the yard and like... doesn't drop it, like wants to fight with you over it, and it's like, no, I'm not reaching my hand in your mouth and like squishing poop around. Like, you're gonna drop it. That's a thing that's happened more than once.
I would not. That's the thing I could not handle. I would not be able to handle trying to. If my dog had poop in its mouth, it's like, no, well, you just decided
Yep.
you're gonna eat it. That's
Yep.
What's up?
If you don't listen to me and you don't drop it, you 100% are eating poop for dinner because I'm not fighting with you over it.
It's one thing I don't want to try to pry away from my dog, no matter how.
Because there's no winning.
Yeah, even if you do get it away from your dog, you lost. You completely lost.
Yep.
Because now your hands are full of shit.
Yep. 100% loss. Right, Opie? Right, Opie, you're a pain. And like, I haven't been walking them because of my foot. So, I mean, that's just adding to the shit.
The pain.
Yeah, like he's just insane. And like, he doesn't want to play anything. He doesn't really play fetch. He plays find stuff and chew it.
Fine stuff. Like,
And he's really good at it. He's really good.
yes. Especially when there's things you don't want him
And
to
even
do.
if you find stuff that like, or you have stuff like put away so he can't get stuff and chew it, he'll just chew like the table legs or the wall or something.
The door. My dog. One thing that's pissing me off is she keeps trying to eat the what's it called? Chew on the cabinet door handles.
Yeah. Opie is like doing it to everything.
It's like don't.
It doesn't matter like if you're wearing it or not. Like he sees like, oh, your sleeves hanging down low from your jacket. I think I need to bite that. Yeah.
Pull that from you.
Or like today I was trying to get dressed for work and he's like biting my belt and like trying to pull my pants away from me as I'm like trying to put them on. Like no, like this is I don't have time for this.
I need to put my pants on.
Yeah, I don't have time for this. Come on, man. Like
yeah.
How's it going, pal?
So this guy wants me to get him some shit from booze. Cars of course run low on food, so they been eating all the grain and fruit. No shame in that. But it also means there ain't no booze. Plenty of folks in that city must be dying for a drink by now. You helped me, so now I'm gonna help you. Take this wine and I'm sure someone will pay pretty coin for it. With my disgusting cat teeth.
Oh, you're just behind me. Okay, cool. I'll actually stop. You're gonna talk to this dude, and then it's like kill a bunch of freaking larvas.
Yeah, there's like giant larvas to eat. Why are people hungry? Just eat the larvas. Oh wait, I don't have that. I don't have to kill larvas. I have to speak with Ludovico.
Oh, okay. I just have I picked up one of that dude's side missions. I could talk to him again, and he gives you some side
Okay.
missions. One of them is to kill some larvas.
Okay, here we go. Now I think I got. Yeah. Gotta pick up this loot from this larvas.
I don't know how many more you need.
I think this is it. Meat beggar. I still have the other quest. Oh wait, I keep hitting 18. Okay, I guess I'm done everything now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he ran off. Okay, coming to catch up.
Oh, I was. Yeah. Oh, there's gonna be a quest that pops up right here. It's like something about fighting with these angry thugs. Yeah.
Damn, my critical hit is on point. I can see an angry thing no more.
That's what that B
Yeah.
button does.
I went from, I don't even know what I was hitting them before, but all of a sudden it was like doing 50 damage thing.
We're here now.
Gotta talk to Ludovico Maduccio. Ludovico Sanchi.
Yeah, he's in.
Alright, so talk to him. Now I gotta go speak with Sanchelli.
Karakorker.
Okay, you went this way. Aha. Aha!
Like, dude, I'm carrying this big thing of fish.
Nice.
Like, it's bigger than me.
Like it's a big ass like box for like 5 fish.
State your business.
Yeah. Did you talk to the guy?
Yeah, I'm gonna grab me a fish. A box of that good fish. We gotta walk slow as shit with this. Just gotta carry one box. Changing health bars. Press down to switch between potion and lunchbox and other stuff. Okay. Wait, you went in the city? No.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, I like missed these steps here. More than happy to do business with me. You better be. I got some gold pieces. I'm in my bag, I'm in my bag. They're both the same. I'll post some background music. Ow. Ow. Mercules. Oh, I have a soda I forgot to drink. Shit. God, lady, that was coming my way. Fine by me. Took the hard way out. Is that too loud?
Nope.
I know you're a Mercules fan.
Mercules is awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm Canadian, but I'm tired of the stereotypes. I don't eat poutine and ride a polar bear every night. Get money, but fine by me. Hard way up, it's the hard way out. A favorite rappers out there wearing Aeropostale.
Three skill points remaining. Elite Warcry. Cool. I guess you're fighting.
Yeah, I'm
these
fighting
things?
the faceless thugs.
Alright. I'll wait in here for you to finish. Then we'll be around the same point.
Okay. Take that, take that, take that. There we go, Don Diego, finally.
Alright, give me
Yeah, take your
2
time.
minutes.
Now I'm starting to get sleepy again.
This is a powerful object. It is bronze.
Hello, Philly. Fairfax Biobank is looking for healthy middle college students and graduates to participate in our sperm donor program via spermdonor.com. Would you help pay with
Coincidence you managed to survive the tragedy
spermdonor.com?
in Tolarian.
You read yours. Earn up to $4,000 6 months while helping families in need. We are in downtown Philadelphia near UPenn and Drexel. To learn more, click the ad below or visit viaspermdonor.com. That's viaspermdonor.com.
Be a spermdonor.com. No, I'm gonna stand up for a minute. Yeah.
Well, no, you have to stay in the bedroom, so you have to stay in the bedroom, so I brought you toys in here.
What a good puppy daddy.
She's I told you about her shit
Yes.
all over the place, right? So I want her to, if she's gonna shit all over the place, at least she can do it in the here in the room with me, rather than like on carpets and everything.
Yeah.
She's got like I set up like 2 puppy pads, like 2 like piss pads, like potty pads kind of thing. You know what I mean, right? I set up like 2 of them on the ground, so she's been using them to poo when she needs to let go of all of her diarrhea. And stuff.
Nice. And that's what we talk about here on the stream of mechanics. Puppy poo. Diarrhea. The most puppy poo that could ever happen.
We talk about dogs more often than anything.
Yeah, we do.
It's very common.
Zeddy.
How Opie's
Yeah, man, Opie is. He's actually been really good right now. He's just laying in the chair, but he's normally a terrorist.
Yeah.
You went this way.
I'm going down here. Pick up some of these little side quests here.
Put you in your face, hit you in your face, hit you in your face. They gon' pump us up. They pump us up, they pump us up. Pump us up, move the numbers up. Man, my face and head itch. Oh.
Be gone, thirsty thoughts. What?
Yeah, be gone, thirsty thoughts. Almost ran right past this guy. Oh, it's the bad guy. I remember that guy. Everybody know my name now. More dead weight, laying down. This quest. Who gives me this quest?
Which one?
Guard? It looks like there's like a quest I can.
There's like a little dude in the middle of the path, if that's what you're talking
I'm like in the inner. I don't know, not quite the square, but
yeah, he's like a little, dude kind of looks a bit more like a cat in a turban.
Okay, I don't see a turban kitty.
Why do you wanna? I don't
what?
see you.
He's not here, right? I'm not crazy.
Well, you're not even here.
What? I can see you right there. What is on your chest? You don't see this big purple circle in front of you?
I don't. Nope, not right now. Now people are starting to show up.
So you have like a
Game
tabard on your. Is that like a guild tabard?
No, it's just the tabard of the shirt I'm wearing, or the gear I'm wearing. Alright, so now you showed up here. And he was here. There's a little dude just right here. Tells you to go get do a quest called About. No, not About Face. Enforcing the dress code.
Wow.
See? University student Cutco. This dude right here.
What? I don't see that person. He's not there for me. I see the like thing on the mini map, so I see where he should be, but I don't see any.
I'm not even as tall as this.
Yeah, that's funny. Alright, I guess I won't. And you don't see me though, right?
Is the.
Okay.
I see you, yeah. So if you click on your map, is the quest called Enforcing the Dress Code?
Yes, I see it on the map. Whoa, he just appeared.
Okay. Yeah, this...
Okay. Cool.
You see, he looks like a little cat.
Yeah, he's definitely a terrible kitty. Pick up that. Ruse the potato monger. I gotta go protect this guy's potato shits. I need to sell some stuff here. Training rod for 450 gold. Hell yes. I guess I sold everything I could sell. Thank you for playing. We're interested in your thoughts, so please leave feedback on our subreddit or send us a ticket. I think I can buy. Okay. I mean, this sucks. Like, I was planning on like being on super late, so I'm off tomorrow, but it's starting to get tired again.
Yeah, getting extremely tired. Yeah, but the good thing is that you can have like, you know, a bunch of time tomorrow too if you really wanted to.
Yeah, I got a little bit to do during the day.
I mean, like,
but I plan on playing this most of the day.
only if you poo-poo on my
Deal.
That's what a guy just said in chat.
You need to ban them.
Only if you poo-poo on my
Ban them, ban them, ban them.
Yeah. Poo-poo on my pee-pee. Wow.
This is a child-friendly zone, bro. Alright, I need some ice for this soda. It's a bit too warm. It's extra bubbly in my throat. So they want me to exchange 1,500 gold for 1,000 star seeds. Is that what I should do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll be right back.
you should get Anderson 400 series windows. I asked, why? Then I responded with, because they're time tested and have fewer callbacks. So I said, makes sense, let's do it. Couldn't be any happier with myself or my new Anderson 400 series windows. Anderson 400 series windows. The window contractors trust most in their own homes. Based on 2018 survey of contractors like Anderson 400 series clad windows.
With more than 450,000 podcasts on Spotify, you're only ever a tap away from your new favorite show. From chilling true crime to the hottest takes in news, pop culture, and sports, there's something for everyone. Tap the banner to start listening now.
come
So I'm
back.
thinking, I'm hoping, because this happens sometimes. My sinuses are so dry because of the weather. And I'm hoping that it's because they're so dry that they're like stuffed up. I'm not getting enough air, and it's just kind of like slowing my breathing down enough that like it's making me fall asleep. Hoping. But I have a question. There's someone here with a B with a diamond behind it. Is that like a guild symbol?
The B above their name, it's a B with a diamond behind it. Means that they're
Okay, it does say GM. Oh, okay.
Means that they work for Bless on Race.
So why is he just hanging out here? It's Nephilim. I think I've seen him in either on Twitter or in the I don't have a wave. I don't know how to wave.
But yeah, they're cool. The game masters. Fragments are normally obtained from ghosts. As far as research material goes, we can never get our hands on enough samples. If you can supply us with a sufficient number of them, then the rest will be indebted to you. Oh, the repeatables.
Where are I gonna go? I'm gonna hand that into the rust. And there's two things to hand into the south. I'm gonna do that first. Does it even make a sound? Yo! This is your fucking leash. Stop fucking eating that. You're not even wearing your leash. You just like got it off the table with a fucking chair. Oh my goodness. This dog.
Oh, but it tastes so good.
For real, like he's dumb as rocks. person not here? Oh, did they just disappear? Is it underground? Says there should be a person right here. Yo, she just wasn't here. That's crazy. Oh, things crashing, it sounds like. Uh-huh.
I don't think so.
My game just crashed.
Oh, okay.
Man, this saline wash hopefully will moisten my nose. Because I actually it feels like my boogers are super crusted. But the other day,
I hate that feeling when it's up, up. Like when it feels like it's like up, not in your
nose, but like in your forehead. Yeah,
nostrils.
Like up in your saucer.
Like,
in your sinuses.
Yeah. Yeah, when you feel the boogers crusted up in your sinuses, it's like that's when it really gets in.
Yeah, I was trying to like get them out at work on my lunch break a couple days ago, and I was actually like bleeding.
Yeah.
All over the tissue. Well, it was like cheap toilet paper, so I thought that's what was causing the bleeding. But it might have been that they're just so dry that they're cracked.
Yeah, that's very possible. I was doing just fine before I met you.
Big news! Right now, all big gulp drinks are 49 cents at 7-Eleven with 7 rewards. A price that small is kind of a big deal because at 7-Eleven, helping everyone save big is the biggest deal of all. So grab a big gulp drink for 49 cents at 7-Eleven today, only with 7 rewards. Plus tax were applicable, only at participating stores.
Yeah, I definitely like the Crusader as a class more than I like the
Berserker.
Berserker, yeah. Now I did like the Archer, and I've never really given the Priest a good shot, but like, like Berserker's okay. It's just it gets kind of slow.
Right.
So.
There's excess saline running out of my nose, which is fun. Now that it's like excess. It feels like it's kind of definitely not as bad as it was, but it's still not great.
Mm-hmm. Why though? Why does the friggin' Crusaders seem like it's stronger than the Berserker?
Yeah, I know you think it would be the other way around. Boom, boom, bam, boom, bam, boom. A little water. I'm going harder. Yeah, I just started to like nod out, standing up. Opie, get out of there. Get out of there. So
you started to what, nod off?
So I'm not gonna be on the bed just yet, but I made it to almost 2 o'clock. So that's a win in my book. So anytime after now I go to bed, I'm okay with it. Oh my god, it's disgusting ass smoke crickets.
Alright, well yeah, I'm going to bed too.
Okay, I'm gonna do a couple more missions. Try to catch up to you.
Okay, you'll probably catch up to me. Yeah.
Alright, adios, Eddie. We'll do this again tomorrow. I'm off, so I'll be gaming all day probably. Alright.
Sounds good. Sounds good, man.
Adios.
Get your turn.
Alright, there we go. Do me. Good boy, I thought you had something you shouldn't have. Good boy. Oh man. What sucks is I don't think the dog's ready for bed. So he'll be going nuts. I guess they're all the same. Thought it was like a spell book or something, and one of them was gonna give me a skill or whatever. So I thought I could also only pick up one of them, so I wanted to make sure I had the right one. Yeah, alright, so that is it for me. I am beat. I'm chugging soda. And other drinks. I ate a bunch of candy. I'm beat. I'm falling asleep again. So actually, there's a thing kinda close. I'm gonna do this. right on the other side. I'm a dummy. Way to look in the center. Good job, Joe. I was like a 20-ounce or 60-ounce soda. Alright, shake it off, shake it off, shake it off. Make it to that blue quest. I know I'm having a hard time. Jump, jump, jump. People could hear me in the game bitching and moaning about how I'm retarded and not being able to make the jumps and
Would you like to see what I have in stock?
Right, I didn't see anyone in the middle. I swear he wasn't there. See? They're trying to trick me. They're like, oh, he's tired. He ain't gonna know what's happening if we just keep moving these freaking NPCs around. Stop sniffing my butt, Opie. What are you doing? Stop sniffing my butt. Stop chewing your leash. Stop being a pain in the ass. Stop sniffing my butt. Damn, dog. Dog is just insane, just does not listen. Knows everything, knows the command, knows what no means, knows how to give, knows how to sit and lay down and all of those things. Does it fine with treat involved. No treat. Does not listen at all. So this is a weird Marco. It's not quite what I pictured. It's like BSM Marco. I'm falling asleep and I can't find these guys. So let me. It's probably that orange beam, but let me. I can't. Okay, I think that's the way out. I'm done. But I'll be on tomorrow. Just, you know, I was up at 7 a.m. this morning. And I went to bed at like 12:30 last night, and then up at 7, and then unloading the truck and stuff. Not fun times. So I am pretty exhausted. Boom. A little bit of drama. I should have had this on the whole time. So, I want to say thank you to you, to yous, all of yous, each and every single one of yous that stop by. Week after week, day after day, whether it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes, 2 seconds, whatever. You chose to spend some time with me, and I appreciate it. Even the people that hop in Facebook, their name pops up, it says so-and-so joined the chat. You get scared, you leave, hoping that nobody sees it. Well, the name stays there until I refresh the page. So, if you're in and out in 2 seconds, and I see it 15 minutes later, I'm still going to know. But that being said, don't be shy. Hop in, talk to me. This is not... Gaming is no longer a solo activity. In fact, I rarely ever play by myself. So it's, if I'm not online with somebody from Zero Logic, whether that's Grim or Zed, the Armored Ozzy, Too Short I was with today, Zero, whoever, then I'm usually playing a game with my girlfriend. So gaming is a spectating sport now. Esports is crazy. And 2, it's not some loser kid in his mom's basement. I mean, some fucking mold and shit infects the basement, just eating pizza till he pukes on himself. It's not that. Oh, it never was that. But South Park made us gamers look kind of gross. Anyway, point being, you're here. I know that you were here. I appreciate you being here. Say what's up. I mean, don't be shy. So also, whether that's on Facebook, or whether you stopped in Twitch or Mixer or YouTube, I appreciate it. The follows, a Beamer 335i followed me yesterday. Pretty sure they followed me before. I guess they unfollowed and refollowed. I don't know if they're trying to manipulate me into giving them a follow back, or what the deal is, or they were cleaning up their stuff and then found me again and realized I'm the coolest cat that they've ever seen, so I was worth another follow. I don't know, but point being, I appreciate you. You thought enough of my content to click that little follow button on Twitch, and it means a lot. I still need to get to my numbers up to get to affiliate. That's the goal I'm pushing now. But yeah, whatever. Even without that, I appreciate everybody coming in, hanging out. That's why I do this. It's not for the fame and the fortune and the whatever. I mean, I'm never gonna make ninja numbers. You know what I mean? But just to share some content, hang out with some cool people, and have a good time. That's all I'm doing it for. Yeah, also the engagement that I get on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, appreciate it all. If you're not following me, follow me on socials. All socials are Mechanic, except for Twitter, it's Mechanic G. Also follow Zero Logic on Instagram and Facebook, Zero Logic Gaming. Trying to put out more content on that. I don't know, I'm rambling. Anyway, I appreciate you stopping by. Everybody who did come in, whatever. Those who didn't come in, you already know the deal. Go fuck yourself.